Let's start the show with a very special interview. Now, as the Khalistani extremism operating in Canada and Canada being a safe haven for Khalistanis is escalating India-Canada tensions, let's talk about the human cost of what's going on in Canada. This is not the first time that India has said that Canada is a safe haven for terrorists. It has been said several times, especially after one unforgettable incident which completely ruined the lives of hundreds. That's the Kanishka bombings. An Air India Flight 182 flying from Montreal to London with its final destination to Delhi exploded on the 23rd of June in 1985 after Khalistani terrorists fitted it with a bomb. It killed all 329 people on board, most of whom were Indian origin Canadians. To this day, the Air India bombing is still the worst terrorist attack in Canadian history and the deadliest act of aviation terrorism before 9/11. For the last nearly 4 decades, time and again, there have been enough and more questions and allegations to say that the Canadian intelligence failed to prevent this attack and largely the Canadian government didn't appropriately act to control Khalistani terrorism in Canada, which has cost many lives till now. One man who has been one of the people who lost their family is Mr. Sanjay Lazar, who can tell us the human cost of the Khalistani extremism still breeding in Canada. Mr. Lazar lost his entire family in the Kanishka bombings and is now joining us live on the broadcast. Mr. Sanjay, thanks very much for joining us on NDTV. It's been 4 decades, but it can never be easy to talk about something like this. You were a child when the Kanishka bombings happened, far too young to even understand what terrorism or Khalistani extremism is. So tell us what it was like back then. You've written a book as well on it, On Angel's Wings, which we're showing our viewers. It's been close to 4 decades now, but what can you tell our viewers who might not know what actually happened in the Kanishka bombings? If you can tell us about that day when you heard that you unfortunately lost your family.
Yes, thank you. It's been a traumatic 38 years since the events of that Sunday, the 23rd of June. It's a day I can't ever forget in my life. I stayed behind, and the rest of my family went on this holiday. My dad was operating the flight. He was an Air India in-flight supervisor of that flight. And it was Sunday. I had, family friends who called me and said they wanted to come over. They came over and took me to their home. And then it was that evening I got to know that the plane had disappeared. I flew off to London that very night and we reached Cork a day later. It was then evident by the time we landed in London that the plane had disappeared and it has probably been bombed from the sky. It was a harrowing experience. It was a nightmare. I was a young 17-year-old kid then, and I really had no one but, family, friends, and my sister's godparents who looked after me. I spent close to a month there. We, searched for the bodies. I was there every day in the hospital in Cork, visiting, looking for my family members. And just when we were almost giving up hope, the last body that came out of the water was number 131, which was my stepmother, Sylvia. And it was a tragic experience, one that I would not want even my worst enemy to go through, because it's gut-wrenching, it's heart-wrenching. You don't know the scale of human tragedy till you see what dismembered, what tragedy looks like. It's terrible. It's just terrible.
Right. Yeah. And we can't even begin to imagine how traumatic that one Sunday would have been for you and how traumatic the last 4 decades have been for you. And while it's extremely hard to, of course, talk about it, but today, again, for the last few weeks, everybody has been talking about how Khalistani extremism is operating in Canada and how there has been a large extent of compliance on the part of the Canadian government. So while we speak about that one incident that completely changed your life, tell us, what have the last 4 decades been like? Has it been full of questions, demanding answers, given that there's so much that has been said on how the Canadian government failed to control Khalistani terrorism? Who do you blame for that horrific bombing that took your family away?
Well, Priyanshi, I want to let you know this. Pandering to radicals is not new. in the Canadian setup, because what happened 38 years ago would not have happened had they not ignored the warning signs. They were monitoring these people. They were monitoring, the terrorists, whether it was Parmar or Rayat or Pagri, CSIS, the Canadian intelligence authorities, had wiretaps on them. They knew something big was going down. They had intelligence officials from across the border, from the US, that came up and met with Parmar and Rayat. So it's not unheard of or unthinkable that they didn't know that something was afoot. It is reported widely, and it's also recorded in Justice John Major's commission's report, that they even followed two of them into the forests of Duncan on Vancouver Island to test fire the bomb. So they were covering up all this while, and India had repeatedly made requests to extradite Parmar at that time. Prior to that, that didn't happen. There was no serious investigation for almost 8-10 years. The trials for the 2 or 3 of them yielded absolutely, they were found not guilty. They walked. And it was only after about 15 years of the families, the Canadian victims' families, we have an organization called the AIVFA, who petitioned and asked, and that's how, Prime Minister Stephen Harper appointed the John Major Commission. So it's been a long struggle for whether you are an Indian survivor or whether you're a Canadian survivor or whether you're an Australian. The survivors struggle to get answers. And even till today, there's no closure, there's no justice. So it's probably more correct to say that Canada is pandering more to them today than they were then. Because today, their government, hinges on these few seats that the radicals offer them. So that's why it makes it even worse today.
Right, Mr. Sanjay Lazar, thanks very much for speaking to NDTV, for taking out the time and taking out, coming on the show with that much courage to speak about something that completely changed your life, took your family away. And the message is clear that the compliance that's going on in Canada and how Khalistani extremism is operating there, this is the human cost. Families have been completely ruined, and this is the reality that hides behind the Khalistani extremism going on in Canada.